10 years have passed since Hannibal Lecter, the notorious cannibal and serial killer, escaped from Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane. Barney, a former employee at the hospital, has a meeting with Mason Verger where he shares information about the relationship between Hannibal and FBI agent Clarice Starling. Barney mentions how the infamous cannibal liked Clarice and was intrigued by her, even though he usually hated and insulted visitors. The conversation ends with Barney offering Mason a rare and precious item, the golden mask that was used on Hannibal in the mental hospital. Verger is Hannibal's only surviving victim and has a dark obsession with him, so he doesn't hold back and immediately orders his private physician, Dr. Cordell, to write a check of $250,000 for the mask. Nobody knows where Hannibal is, but Clarice still works for the FBI and now leads an important drug raid. After one of the police officers disobeys her orders during the mission, the raid turns into a disaster, resulting in 5 killings. Clarice is deeply hurt by the raid's outcome, especially since she had to shoot the drug dealer Evelda Drumgo while the target was carrying her baby. As the team leader, Clarice gets blamed for the disaster by the media and the public. Verger learns about the mess on TV and sees it as an opportunity to get his revenge on Hannibal. Since he is very rich and powerful, he bribes the Justice Department and uses them to put Clarice in a tough position. So according to his instructions, the Justice Department offers her a deal. In exchange for clearing her name in the media, Clarice is reassigned to Hannibal's case and has to meet with Verger to discuss a new clue he found. Even though she regrets shooting Drumgo, Clarice is disappointed with the FBI's corruption. They are blackmailing and punishing her with no grounds, but she must accept the task in order to save her career. She meets with Verger at his mansion where he lies in bed surrounded by TV screens. Clarice follows procedure, but Verger becomes sentimental and starts recollecting his past. Clarice isn't interested in Verger, especially in his history of sadism and disturbing sexual offenses, and so they move on to the night Hannibal attacked him. Verger explains how he invited Hannibal into his home hoping they would make love. But Hannibal had a different idea. He drugged Verger, made him cut off his own face, and fed the pieces of flesh to a dog. After describing the painful memory, Verger shows Clarice the clue, an X-ray of Hannibal's broken arm he got in an envelope sent from Buenos Aires. When the short, intense encounter with Verger ends, Clarice goes through FBI files, looking for the footage which shows how Hannibal broke his arm. Looking at the video, Clarice discovers how Barney was the one who broke Hannibal's arm when he tried to stop the cannibal from eating one of the nurses alive. In the filing room, a colleague tells Clarice how evidence from the Hannibal Lecter case frequently goes missing because people are willing to pay a lot of money for Hannibal memorabilia. Clarice connects the dots and thinks Barney has something to do with the X-ray found by Verger since he was close to Hannibal and was the one who broke the arm. She starts following Barney and sooner than later shows up at his doorstep, ready to dig deeper. Barney welcomes Clarice with suspicion and is ready to hide the truth as much as he can. When asked by Clarice whether he is afraid of Lecter coming to eat him, Barney tells Clarice that Hannibal prefers to eat the root. He thinks he survived Hannibal for 6 years only by being polite and civil toward him. But Barney is not as innocent as he thinks. Clarice quickly confronts him with evidence that he is the one selling old Hannibal items, including a book signed by the notorious cannibal named The Joy of Cooking. Barney realizes he can't lie to Clarice for long and quickly opens up. After the hospital closed down, Barney took some of Lecter's items and are now selling them for a high price. Clarice orders him to give her everything he has along with the X-ray photo. While printing the photo, Barney desperately tries to convince her and himself that he is still a good man, especially when compared to Dr. Chilton, who taped Clarice's conversations with Lecter in the asylum. Barney shows those exact tapes to Clarice. He then gives them to her and reminds her how financially valuable they are. After her insightful conversation with Barney, Clarice starts listening to the tapes and her mortifying yet brilliant conversations with Dr. Hannibal Lecter. As Hannibal explains in one of the tapes that he wants to be next to the water and enjoy nature, the action moves to Italy where Chief Inspector Rinaldo Pozzi is wandering through the streets of Florence. The inspector is headed toward a questioning connected to the disappearance of the chief library curator Signore de Bonaventura. He wants to interrogate the newly appointed curator Dr. Fell, but little does he know, the overly curious and seemingly innocent scholar is actually the infamous Hannibal Lecter. The two of them have a short conversation about the missing curator and Dr. Fell agrees to hand over any extra documents he finds. Meanwhile, in the US, Clarice is in her office, surrounded by a pile of documents and opening up newly arrived letters. She notices how one of the letters has a unique seal and her name written in cursive handwriting. She instantly suspects it's from her deranged admirer, Hannibal. Clarice puts on gloves, carefully opens up the letter, and discovers that her suspicions were correct. In the letter, Hannibal does brief psychoanalysis of Clarice, mentioning how she is leading her life according to her father's value system and how her father would have been humiliated by her recent failure, the raid. Hannibal also mentions his suspicions about Clarice working on his case again and his plans to come back from retirement and get in the public eye one more time. Even though she is disturbed by the tapes and the letter, Clarice is a quick thinker, so she tries to find Hannibal's location through the type of paper he used. After that proves impossible, she contacts a team of perfume experts to try to pinpoint the location by identifying which perfume Hannibal sprayed on the paper. While sniffing the letter, the experts identify hand cream with a rare ingredient, ambergris. They tell Clarice that such creams are usually sold in perfume shops in Asia and Europe, including Italy. From the USA, the FBI requests security footage from all perfume shops that have products with ambergris. However, they don't mention the reason for this, and nobody knows that the FBI is in fact looking for Hannibal. As the police in Florence look through the footage before sending it to the FBI, Pazzi by chance notices Dr. Fell in one of the videos sniffing a perfume stick. Pazzi's sharp detective instincts lead him to suspicions about the doctor, so he starts following him. During the stakeout, he sees Dr. Fell wiping off the stains of a wine glass he used in a restaurant. This confirms his doubts, so, at home, Pazzi checks the top 10 most wanted FBI list and finds Dr. Fell by the name of none other than Hannibal Lecter. Pazzi does a quick internet search and discovers an anonymous site offering a $3 million reward for information about the whereabouts of Lecter. He is tempted by the prize and decides to try to capture the killer on his own. Clarice is also doing research. She is listening to one of the tapes when Paul Krendler, a corrupt assistant attorney general who works for the Justice Department, walks into the evidence room. He sees all the horrifying pictures of Hannibal's murders, but the thing that catches his eye the most is one of the killer's drawings, a naked woman. Unaware that Clarice is in the room, he peeps at the picture and laughs. Clarice reveals her presence and scares Krendler. She then proceeds to explain how Hannibal chooses his victims. She tells Krendler that Hannibal either kills people who annoy him or those he thinks damage society. Krendler ignores the important information and only wants to remind Clarice that she should do her job more efficiently unless she wants the Justice Department to ruin her career. He says a lot of misogynistic comments and tries to put Clarice down while trying to persuade her to sleep with him at the same time. Not long after, Clarice is talking to Agent Benetti from the Florence police on the phone, telling him how she still hasn't received security footage from the perfume shops in Florence. Benetti is confused since he knows he found the footage, but what both of them don't know is that Pazzi has already started to disrupt the investigation for his financial benefit. But what Pazzi didn't know is that the process of getting the reward for information about Lecter is much more complicated than he initially thought. He learns he needs to provide a fingerprint from Hannibal before he can receive the money. Pazzi decides to visit Hannibal, foolishly thinking he can outsmart the genius and psychotic doctor. Lecter, disguised as Dr. Fell, welcomes the detective with documents for the other case, the disappearance of Signore de Bonaventure. During their conversation, it becomes obvious that Hannibal suspects Pazzi knows his true identity. Hannibal starts playing his famous mind games and mentions the detective's ancestors, reminding him that 500 years ago one of them was hanged at the public square for murder. Pazzi soon realizes that it won't be easy taking this killer's fingerprints. That's why after his morbid visit to Hannibal's residence, he creates a clever plan. Pazzi hires a thief and puts a shiny silver bracelet on his wrist. The idea is for the thief to pretend to steal something from Hannibal. The detective suspects Hannibal will grab the thief by the wrist to stop him from stealing and leave his fingerprints on the bracelet in the process. But the situation doesn't go as planned. Hannibal notices the thief following him, leads him to a crowd, and quickly stabs him in the abdomen without anybody seeing. Pazzi feels guilty because the thief tragically dies, but he is satisfied because Hannibal leaves fingerprints on the bracelet after all. The buyer turns out to be Verger, who receives the fingerprints from Pazzi on a computer and starts executing his carefully planned revenge. He is collaborating with criminals from an Italian farm to kidnap Lecter and feed him to wild boars, just like Hannibal once fed his face to a dog. Pazzi finally receives the money but decides to stay involved in the kidnapping to make sure things go according to plan. But not many people have outsmarted this serial killer. So when Pazzi visits the opera with his wife, he finds Hannibal there as well. After the play, the killer approaches the couple, flirts with Pazzi's wife, and gives her a page of Dante's sonnet. Ironically, the poem describes how a woman is so infatuated with a man that she eats his heart. Pazzi takes this as a slight warning and wants to get Hannibal out of his life as soon as possible. He doesn't think Hannibal is onto him though, but soon finds out that Clarice is. By checking who logged into the FBI's most wanted list, Clarice discovers that Pazzi logged in multiple times from his home address and read all the data on Hannibal. Soon after, she receives the security footage from Florence and identifies Hannibal in one of the videos. Considering the missing files from Florence and Pazzi's login data in the FBI, she calls the Florentine detective to learn more about his actions. When the detective denies ever hearing of Hannibal, Clarice realizes his plan. She knows that he wants to sell the information to Verger and begs Pazzi to stop, warning him how dangerous Hannibal can be. Potsy ignores Clarice's warnings and heads to a university lecture held by Hannibal on the topic of Dante's Inferno. There, with the help of Verger's assistants, he hopes to kidnap the serial killer and finish the whole ordeal. When the lecture ends, Potsy calls the assistants who are waiting outside, but Hannibal chloroforms him and ties him up. Potsy wakes up when Hannibal is putting a rope around his neck. The killer threatens to eat Potsy's wife if the detective refuses to answer questions. Hannibal asks whether Verger is involved and Potsy answers yes with blinking. Suddenly, a phone call interrupts the questioning. It's Clarice, desperately trying to persuade Potsy to avoid Hannibal. Surprisingly to her, Hannibal answers the phone and leaves Clarice in shock. The cannibal is kind to Clarice but hangs Potsy out of the same window his ancestor hung 500 years ago. Hannibal wants Potsy to look like the medieval description of Judas, so he cuts the victim's stomach so that his bowels can hang from his body. Soon after, Clarice watches the tape of Potsy's hanging and sees how Hannibal is waving at the camera. Verger watches it at his home too, trying to think of a different plan to capture and punish his nemesis. He knows Clarice is Hannibal's weakness and decides to set her up as bait again. He bribes Krendler with $500,000 and wants him to falsely accuse Clarice of withholding a love letter sent by Hannibal. Their plan is successful. Clarice gets suspended and thrown off the case. Starling knows Krendler is collaborating with Verger and that they both faked the letter. She shares her suspicions with her boss but gets ignored and sent home. Verger thinks this injustice will draw out Hannibal, who is excited by seeing Clarice in distress. Verger is spot on about Hannibal, as we soon see the serial killer in the USA entering Krendler's home, buying cutlery, and stealing equipment from a hospital. Hannibal also visits Clarice while she is sleeping and leaves a cutout picture of her head on top of a seductive photograph from a Gucci magazine. When she wakes up and notices the photo, she instantly gets a call from the serial killer, giving her instructions that lead to his location. Clarice is suspended but has a strong sense of duty, so she can't say no to an opportunity for catching the mad cannibal and putting him in custody. However, her plan goes astray. When she arrives at the location, Union Station in downtown DC, Clarice notices two men following her. Turns out Verger knew Hannibal would contact Clarice and instructed his men to follow her. Clarice and Hannibal play a game of cat and mouse while she tries to find and capture him. When Hannibal leaves the station, Verger's men spot Lecter and immediately tase her and kidnap him. Clarice knows that Verger is behind the kidnapping, so she asks her boss to search the millionaire's mansion. Lecter is nowhere to be found because Verger predicted the police search, so he kept him in a van until the police left the mansion. As soon as the officers leave, Verger's men bring stranded Hannibal to the property. In the meantime, Clarice decides to face the entire situation on her own and breaks into Verger's mansion. Inside, the millionaire proudly circles the cannibal while hinting at the type of revenge he is planning. With an evil grin, Verger says to Hannibal, "You wish you fed the rest of me to the dogs," after which Hannibal cold-heartedly replies, "No, I much prefer you the way you are." While Verger's men are leaving strained Hannibal in an empty pig pen surrounded by hungry boars, Clarice enters and shoots some of the men. As she tries to free Hannibal, one of the kidnappers shoots her. Hannibal manages to cut the ropes himself and saves wounded Clarice. As he brings her out of the barn, Verger orders Dr. Cordell to shoot Hannibal. But the manipulative and intelligent serial killer gives Cordell another idea. He tells him to push Verger into the pit and that he's ready to take the blame. Without a second thought, Cordell leaves Verger to the mercy of the hungry boars, and Hannibal escapes with Clarice in his hands. Probably according to plan, Hannibal goes to Krendler's lake house and drugs the attorney. Later, Clarice wakes up in the bedroom, wearing a black evening dress. Her gunshot wound has been sealed, but she is still feeling dizzy and disoriented because Hannibal gave her morphine. She uses all her strength to scout the location, call the police, and find an object she can use as a weapon. The police tell her they will arrive in 10 minutes and advise her to leave, but she grabs a pair of handcuffs and a snowball and slowly starts walking downstairs. There, she sees Hannibal preparing dinner for half-conscious Krendler. The attorney is wearing a baseball cap and is acting like a child. Hannibal greets Clarice but charmingly tells her to put down the snowball. She sits at the table close to Krendler and notices how his head is bleeding beneath the cap. As Krendler becomes ruder toward Clarice, Hannibal questions her about her loyalty to an institution that despises her. During their conversation, Hannibal takes out Krendler's cap, and we see a large scar around the top of his skull. The serial killer removes the top skull, revealing a large portion of Krendler's brain. The attorney is still speaking half present, slowly shutting down like a broken machine. Hannibal continues to explain how the brain doesn't feel pain while removing and frying parts of Krendler's prefrontal lobe. Then, he feeds those pieces to Krendler. Clarice is disgusted and begs the deranged cannibal to stop. Lecter asks Clarice to let him go and give him his freedom. He goes to the kitchen with half-conscious Krendler to leave Clarice time to think. But she takes a candlestick and tries to attack him in the kitchen. Hannibal stops her and throws her against a refrigerator, trapping her ponytail in the door and ripping out the handle. He asks her whether she will beg him to stop if he starts eating her. With a minimal expression, Clarice tells him she will never do that. He kisses her, and she uses the opportunity to handcuff their wrists together. The police are coming, so Hannibal has no other choice but to cut Clarice's hand. Instead, he cuts his own and leaves the premises. Clarice starts running to the nearby lake to check if Hannibal climbed on a boat. The police arrive, but there's no trace of the killer. In the final scene, we see Hannibal on an airplane. He opens up a box filled with all kinds of food, figs, caviar, grapes, and last but not least, parts of Krendler's brain. A child sitting next to the killer asks questions about the food and wants to try the brain, not knowing what it actually is. Hannibal is reluctant at first but then gives the kid a bite, remembering how his mother told him that it's important to try new things.